James Ramsay MacDonald, FRS, was a British statesman who was the first Labour Party Prime Minister, leading a Labour government in 1924, a Labour government from 1929 to 1931, and a national government from 1931 to 1935. His reputation has oscillated dramatically. He first established himself as the intellectual leader of the Labour Party before 1914, but was widely denounced for his anti-war position during the First World War. Widespread disillusionment with the result of the war led to his rehabilitation in the 1920s, and he was widely applauded for his moderation as the first Labour Prime Minister. In his last role 1931 to 35, he broke from his party and led a primarily conservative coalition. Labourites bitterly denounced him as a traitor to their cause. Political activists attacked him for supporting appeasement of Hitler's Germany. Since the late 1970s, historians have rehabilitated his reputation, emphasizing his role as a forerunner of the political realignments of the 1990s and 2000s. Historians credit MacDonald, along with Keir Hardie and Arthur Henderson, as one of the three principal founders of the Labour Party. His speeches, pamphlets and books made him an important theoretician, but he played an even more important role as leader of the Labour Party. He entered Parliament in 1906 and was the chairman of the Labour MPs from 1911 to 1914. His opposition to the First World War made him unpopular, and he was defeated in 1918. The anti-war mood of the 1920s made him a heroic figure, and he returned to Parliament in 1922, as his party replaced the Liberal Party as the second largest party. His first government, formed with Liberal support in 1924, lasted 9 months, but was defeated at the 1924 general election when the electorate punished Labour over mishandling the Campbell case. Nevertheless, his short term demonstrated that the Labour Party was sufficiently competent and well organised to run the government. MacDonald heavily emphasised foreign policy. He initially put his faith in the League of Nations. However, by the early 1930s he felt that the internal cohesion of the British Empire, a protective tariff, and an independent British defence programme would be the wisest policy. Nevertheless, budget pressures and a strong popular pacifist sentiment forced a reduction in the military and naval budgets. Labour returned to power, this time as the largest party, in 1929, but was soon overwhelmed by the crisis of the Great Depression, in which the Labour government was split by demands for public spending cuts to preserve the gold standard. In 1931, MacDonald formed a national government in which only 2 of his Labour colleagues agreed to serve. His majority came from the Conservatives. He abandoned the gold standard and called the general election in 1931, seeking a doctor's mandate to do whatever necessary to fix the economy. MacDonald's national coalition won a smashing landslide, and the Labour Party was reduced to a rump of around 50 seats in the House of Commons. MacDonald remained Prime Minister of the national government from 1931 to 1935. During this time his health rapidly deteriorated and he became increasingly ineffective as a leader. He stood down as Prime Minister in 1935, but stayed in the cabinet as Lord President of the Council until retiring from the government in 1937. Early life. Lossiemouth. MacDonald was born at Gregory Place, Lossiemouth, Morayshire, Scotland, the illegitimate son of John MacDonald, a farm labourer, and Anne Ramsay, a housemaid. Although registered at birth as James MacDonald Ramsay, he was known as Jamie MacDonald. Illegitimacy could be a serious handicap in 19th-century Presbyterian Scotland, but in the north and northeast farming communities, this was less of a problem. In 1868, a report of the Royal Commission on the Employment of Children, Young Persons and Women in Agriculture noted that the illegitimacy rate was around 15%. 10%. His mother had worked as a domestic servant at Claydale Farm, near Alves, where her future husband was also employed. They were to have been married, but the wedding never took place, either because the couple quarreled and chose not to marry, or because Anne's mother, Isabella Ramsay, stepped in to prevent her daughter from marrying a man she deemed unsuitable. Ramsay MacDonald received an elementary education at the Free Church of Scotland School in Lossiemouth from 1872 to 1875, and then at Drayney Parish School. He left school at the end of the summer term in 1881, at the age of 15, and began work on a nearby farm. In December 1881 he was appointed as a pupil teacher at Drayney Parish School. In 1885 he left to take up a position as an assistant to Mordaunt Crofton, a clergyman in Bristol who was attempting to establish a boys' and young men's guild at St Stephen's Church. It was in Bristol that Ramsay MacDonald joined the Democratic Federation, a radical sect. This federation changed its name a few months later to the Social Democratic Federation. He remained in the group when it left the SDF to become the Bristol Socialist Society. In early 1886 he moved to London, young semi-socialist in London. Following a short period of work addressing envelopes at the National Cyclists' Union in Fleet Street, he found himself unemployed and forced to live on the small amount of money he had saved from his time in Bristol. MacDonald eventually found employment as an invoice clerk in the warehouse of Cooper, Box & Co. During this time he was deepening his socialist credentials, and engaged himself energetically in C.L. Fitzgerald's Socialist Union, which, unlike the SDF, aimed to progress socialist ideals through the parliamentary system. MacDonald witnessed the Bloody Sunday of the 13th of November 1887 in Trafalgar Square, and in response, had a pamphlet published by the Pall Mall Gazette, entitled Remember Trafalgar Square, Tory Terrorism in 1887. MacDonald retained an interest in Scottish politics. Gladstone's first Irish Home Rule Bill inspired the setting up of a Scottish Home Rule Association in Edinburgh. On 6 March 1888, MacDonald took part in a meeting of London-based Scots who, upon his motion, formed the London General Committee of Scottish Home Rule Association. For a while he supported Home Rule for Scotland, but found little support among London Scots. However, MacDonald never lost his interest in Scottish politics and Home Rule. In Socialism, Critical and Constructive, published in 1921, he wrote, "The Anglification of Scotland has been proceeding apace to the damage of its education, its music, its literature, its genius, and the generation that is growing up under this influence is uprooted from its past." Politics in the 1880s was still of less importance to MacDonald than furthering his education. He took evening classes in science, botany, agriculture, mathematics, and physics at the Birkbeck Literary and Scientific Institution, but his health suddenly failed him due to exhaustion 1 week before his examinations. This put an end to any thought of a scientific career. In 1888, MacDonald took employment as private secretary to Thomas Locke, who was a tea merchant and a radical politician. Locke was elected as the Liberal Member of Parliament for West Islington in 1892. Many doors now opened to MacDonald. He had access to the National Liberal Club as well as the editorial offices of liberal and radical newspapers. He made himself known to various London radical clubs among radical and Labour politicians. MacDonald gained valuable experience in the workings of electioneering. At the same time he left Lough's employment to branch out as a freelance journalist. Elsewhere as a member of the Fabian Society for some time, MacDonald toured and lectured on its behalf at the London School of Economics and elsewhere. Active politics. The TUC had created the Labour Electoral Association and entered into an unsatisfactory alliance with the Liberal Party in 1886. In 1892, MacDonald was in Dover to give support to the candidate for the Lee in the general election, who was well beaten. MacDonald impressed the local press and the association and was adopted as its candidate, announcing that his candidature would be under a Labour Party banner. He denied the Labour Party was a wing of the Liberal Party but saw merit in a working political relationship. In May 1894, the local Southampton Liberal Association was trying to find a Labour-minded candidate for the constituency. Two others joined MacDonald to address the Liberal Council. One was offered but turned down the invitation, while MacDonald failed to secure the nomination despite strong support among Liberals. In 1893, Keir Hardie had formed the Independent Labour Party, which had established itself as a mass movement. In May 1894, MacDonald applied for membership, and was accepted. He was officially adopted as the ILP candidate for one of the Southampton seats on the 17th of July 1894, but was heavily defeated at the election of 1895. MacDonald stood for Parliament again in 1900 for one of the two Leicester seats, and although he lost, was generously accused of splitting the Liberal vote to allow the Conservative candidate to win. The same year he became Secretary of the Labour Representation Committee, the forerunner of the Labour Party, while retaining membership of the ILP. While it was not a Marxist organisation, it was more rigorously socialist than the once and future Labour Party, in which the ILP members would operate as a ginger group for many years. As party secretary, MacDonald negotiated an agreement with the leading Liberal politician Herbert Gladstone, which allowed Labour to contest a number of working-class seats without Liberal opposition, thus giving Labour its first breakthrough into the House of Commons. He married Margaret Ethel Gladstone, who was unrelated to the Gladstones of the Liberal Party, in 1896. Although not wealthy, Margaret MacDonald was comfortably off, and this allowed them to indulge in foreign travel, visiting Canada and the United States in 1897, South Africa in 1902, Australia and New Zealand in 1906, and India several times. It was during this period that MacDonald and his wife began a long friendship with the social investigator and reforming civil servant Clara Collett, with whom he discussed women's issues. She was an influence on MacDonald and other politicians in their attitudes towards women's rights. In 1901, he was elected to the London County Council for Finsbury Central as a joint Labour Progressive Party candidate, but he was disqualified from the register in 1904 due to his absences abroad. In 1906, the LRC changed its name to the Labour Party, amalgamating the ILP. In that same year, MacDonald was elected MP for Leicester along with 28 others, and became one of the leaders of the Parliamentary Labour Party. These Labour MPs undoubtedly owed their election to the Progressive Alliance between the Liberals and Labour, a minor party supporting the Liberal governments of Henry Campbell Bannerman and H. Asquith. MacDonald became the leader of the left wing of the party, arguing that Labour must seek to displace the Liberals as the main party of the left. Party leader. In 1911, MacDonald became party leader. He was the chief intellectual leader of the party, paying little attention to class warfare and much more to the emergence of a powerful state as it exemplified the Darwinian evolution of an ever more complex society. He was an orthodox Edwardian progressive, keen on intellectual discussion, and adverse to agitation. Within a short period his wife became ill with blood poisoning and died. This deeply and permanently affected MacDonald. MacDonald had always taken a keen interest in foreign affairs and knew from his visit to South Africa just after the Boer War had ended what the effects of modern conflict would be. Although the Parliamentary Labour Party generally held an anti-war opinion, when war was declared in August 1914, patriotism came to the fore. The party supported the government in its request for 100 £300 million of war credits, and as MacDonald could not, he resigned the party chairmanship. Arthur Henderson became the new leader while MacDonald took the party treasurer's post. During the early part of the war he was extremely unpopular and was accused of treason and cowardice. Former Liberal Party MP and publisher Horatio Bottomley attacked him through his magazine John Bull in September 1915 by publishing an article carrying details of MacDonald's birth and his so-called deceit in not disclosing his real name. His illegitimacy was no secret and he had not seemed to have suffered by it, but according to the journal he had, by using a false name, gained access to Parliament falsely and should suffer heavy penalties and have his election declared void. MacDonald received much internal support, but the way in which the disclosures were made public had affected him. He wrote in his diary, "I spent hours of terrible mental pain. Letters of sympathy began to pour in upon me. Never before did I know that I had been registered under the name of Ramsay, and cannot understand it now. From my earliest years my name has been entered in lists like the school register, etc." As MacDonald, despite opposition to the war, MacDonald visited the Western Front in December 1914 with the approval of Lord Kitchener. MacDonald and General Seeley set off for the front Ypres and soon found themselves in the thick of an action in which both behaved with the utmost coolness. Later, MacDonald was received by the Commander-in-Chief at St Omer and made an extensive tour of the front. Returning home, he paid a public tribute to the courage of the French troops, but said nothing then or later of having been under fire himself. As the war dragged on, his reputation recovered, but he still lost his seat in the 1918 coupon election, which saw the Liberal David Lloyd George's coalition government win a large majority, 1920–24. MacDonald stood for Parliament in the 1921 Woolwich East by-election and lost. In 1922, MacDonald was returned to the House as MP for Aberavon in Wales, with a vote of 14,318 against 11,111 and 5,328 for his main opponents. His rehabilitation was complete. The Labour New Leader magazine opined that his election was enough in itself to transform our position in the House. We have once more a voice which must be heard. By now, the party was reunited and MacDonald was re-elected as leader. Historian Kenneth Morgan examines his newfound stature. As dissolution set in with the Lloyd George coalition in 1921–2, and unemployment mounted, MacDonald stood out as the leader of a new kind of broad-based left. His opposition to the war had given him a new charisma. More than anyone else in public life, he symbolized peace and internationalism, decency and social change. Had become the voice of conscience. At the 1922 election, Labour replaced the Liberals as the main opposition party to the Conservative government of Stanley Baldwin, making MacDonald leader of the opposition. By now, he had moved away from the Labour left and abandoned the socialism of his youth. He strongly opposed the wave of radicalism that swept through the Labour movement in the wake of the Russian Revolution of 1917 and became a determined enemy of communism. Unlike the French Socialist Party and the Social Democratic Party of Germany, the Labour Party did not split and the Communist Party of Great Britain remained small and isolated. MacDonald became noted for woolly rhetoric such as the occasion at the Labour Party conference of 1930 at Llandudno, when he appeared to imply unemployment could be solved by encouraging the jobless to return to the fields, where they till and they grow and they sow and they harvest. Equally, there were times it was unclear what his policies were. There was already some unease in the party about what he would do if Labour was able to form a government. At the 1923 election, the Conservatives had lost the majority, and when they lost a vote of confidence in the House in January 1924, King George V called on MacDonald to form a minority Labour government, with the tacit support of the Liberals under Asquith from the corner bench. He became the first Labour Prime Minister, the first from a working-class background and one of the very few without a university education. First government. He had never held office but demonstrated energy, executive ability, and political astuteness. He consulted widely within his party, making the Liberal Lord Haldane the Lord Chancellor, and Philip Snowdon Chancellor of the Exchequer. He took the Foreign Office himself. Besides himself, 10 other cabinet members came from working-class origins, a dramatic breakthrough in British history. His first priority was to undo the damage caused by the harsh 1919 Treaty of Versailles, by settling the reparations issue and coming to terms with Germany. The King noted in his diary, he wishes to do the right thing. Today, 23 years ago, dear Grandmama died. I wonder what she would have thought of a Labour government. While there were no major Labour strikes during his term, MacDonald acted swiftly to end those that did erupt. When the Labour Party executive criticised the government, he replied that public doles, popularism, strikes for increased wages, limitation of output, not only are not socialism, but may mislead the spirit and policy of the socialist movement. The government lasted only 9 months and did not have a majority in either House of the Parliament, but it was still able to support the unemployed with the extension of benefits and amendments to the Insurance Acts. In a personal triumph for John Wheatley, Minister for Health, a Housing Act was passed, which greatly expanded municipal housing for low-paid workers. Foreign affairs. MacDonald had long been a leading spokesman for internationalism in the Labour movement. At first he verged on pacifism. He founded the Union of Democratic Control in early 1914 to promote international socialist aims, but it was overwhelmed by the war. His 1916 book, National Defense, revealed his own long-term vision for peace. Although disappointed at the harsh terms of the Versailles Treaty, he supported the League of Nations, but by 1930 he felt that the internal cohesion of the British Empire and a strong, independent British defence programme might turn out to be the wisest British government policy. MacDonald moved in March 1924 to end construction work on the Singapore military base despite strong opposition from the Admiralty. He believed the building of the base would endanger the disarmament conference. The First Sea Lord Beatty considered the absence of such a base is dangerously imperiling British trade in territories east of Aden and could mean the security of the British Empire in the Far East being dependent on the goodwill of Japan. In June 1924, MacDonald convened a conference in London of the wartime allies and achieved an agreement on a new plan for settling the reparations issue and French occupation of the Ruhr. German delegates joined the meeting, and the London settlement was signed. It was followed by an Anglo-German commercial treaty. Another major triumph for MacDonald was the conference held in London in July and August 1924 to deal with the implementation of the Dawes Plan. MacDonald, who accepted the popular view of the economist John Maynard Keynes of German reparations as impossible to pay, pressured French Premier Edouard Herriot until many concessions were made to Germany. A British onlooker commented, "The London conference was for the French man in the street, one long Calvary." As he saw M. period, abandoning one by one the cherished possessions of French preponderance on the Reparations Commission, the right of sanctions in the event of German default, the economic occupation of the Ruhr, the French-Belgian Railroad (RE-GIE), and finally, the military occupation of the Ruhr within a year. MacDonald was proud of what had been achieved, which was the pinnacle of his short-lived administration's achievements. In September, he made a speech to the League of Nations Assembly in Geneva, the main thrust of which was for general European disarmament, which was received with great acclaim. Britain had already recognized the Soviet Union, and MacDonald informed Parliament in February 1924 that negotiations would begin to negotiate a treaty with the Soviet Union. The treaty was to cover Anglo-Soviet trade and the situation of the British bondholders, who had contracted with the pre-revolutionary Russian government and been rejected by the Bolsheviks. There were in fact two proposed treaties. One would cover commercial matters, and the other would cover a fairly vague future discussion on the problem of the bondholders. If the treaties were signed, the British government would conclude a further treaty and guarantee a loan to the Bolsheviks. The treaties were popular neither with the Conservatives nor with the Liberals, who, in September, criticized the loan so vehemently that negotiation with them seemed impossible. However, it was the Campbell case, the abrogation of prosecuting the left-wing newspaper The Workers' Weekly, that determined its fate. The Conservatives put forth a censure motion, to which the Liberals added an amendment. MacDonald's cabinet resolved to treat both motions as matters of confidence, which, if passed, would necessitate a dissolution of government. The Liberal amendment carried, and the King granted MacDonald a dissolution of Parliament the following day. The issues that dominated the election campaign were, unsurprisingly, the Campbell case and the Russian treaties, which soon combined into the single issue of the Bolshevik threat. Zinoviev letter on the 25th of October 1924, just 4 days before the election. The Daily Mail reported that a letter had come into its possession which purported to be a letter sent from Grigory Zinoviev, the president of the Communist International, to the British representative on the Comintern Executive. The letter was dated the 15th of September, and so before the dissolution of Parliament, it stated that it was imperative for the agreed treaties between Britain and the Bolsheviks to be ratified urgently. The letter said that those Labour members who could apply pressure on the government should do so. It went on to say that a resolution of the relationship between the two countries would assist in the revolutionizing of the international and British proletariat, make it possible for us to extend and develop the ideas of Leninism in England and the colonies. The government had received the letter before the publication in the newspapers and had protested to the Bolsheviks' London charge d'affaires and had already decided to make public the contents of the letter with details of the official protest, but had not been swift-footed enough. Historians mostly agree the letter was a forgery, but it closely reflected attitudes current in the Comintern. In any case, it had little impact on the Labour vote, which actually increased. It was the collapse of the Liberal Party that led to the Conservative landslide. However, many Labourites for years blamed the defeat on the letter by misunderstanding the political forces at work. Despite all that had gone on, the result of the election was not disastrous for Labour. The Conservatives were returned decisively, gaining 155 seats for a total of 413 members of Parliament. Labour lost 40 seats but held on to 151. The Liberals lost 118 seats and the vote fell by over 1 million. The real significance of the election was that the Liberals, whom Labour had displaced as the second largest political party in 1922, were now clearly the third party.